Well, thank you everyone for joining. Do still see participants coming in, but in the interest of time, we'll go ahead and get this meeting started. Thank you all for joining us for a session on, yes, CMMC is here. Some might think the Grinch showed up or this might be a Christmas present, but we're going to talk a little bit about the fact that the final rule is here and what that means for you, and hopefully provide some insight as to what things you can do to help get prepared for the meeting. Um, I'm Tom Leahy. I'm the VP of Sales and Business Development with SureShield. And we are a technology provider. Folks use our technology to help make this process a little bit more easier. And our presenter today is Mike Crandall. Mike is the CEO of Digital Beachhead. Um, we'll give you a little insight in terms of what the interpretation is of this new rule, uh, talk a little bit about the pitfalls, and then things that you need to do to get ready. Mike, I'm going to ask you to give a little bit of your background first, and then also for those who are familiar a little bit with this process, Mike's company will be a C3PAO, meaning that they will be able to actually do the assessments and accreditation for those of you that will have to go through that third-party audit. One of the benefits of working with a C3PO is that if you need them to help you get ready, they can do that for you as well. Unlike the RPOs, won't have quite the same detail of knowledge of what this process will be like. But Mike, let me first ask you to give a little bit of your background and tell us a little bit about you and a little bit about Digital Beachhead.
Thanks, Tom. Glad to be here. So myself, I'm a 21-year Air Force veteran doing cybersecurity operations since DIRT, since that they began in the military and the DoD. That's why when CMMC came about, we decided we wanted to be a part of it because it's kind of what I grew up and did while I was in the military. As Digital Beachhead, as you said, we're right now a candidate, C3PAO, but we are at the final end of our DIPCAC audit. And so we should be a fully fledged authorized C3PAO by the end of the year. We're finishing that up hopefully by Monday. And we have been working with clients and with SureShield for a good 3 years now, helping them get ready for CMMC and all of the changes that have occurred along the way. And so it's been an adventure.
Great. And Mike, as a C3PO, you essentially have gone through the process that anyone that's going to get audited is going to have to go through. Is that correct?
That's correct. We had to meet all 110 controls, and DIBCAC wants each control verified uh, by showing. So not only did we need the policy and the procedure, we had to show them the technical implementation and how we implemented each of the 110. And being honest, and we'll get into this a little later, more than just the 110 controls, but the 321 sub articles under the controls that also need to be met.
Great. And as I mentioned, we did have a number of people submit some questions ahead of time. I'm going to go ahead and ask you kind of that first one, but just for the audience that's with us, a reminder, if you have other questions along the way, please direct them to the Q&A of the meeting. But really that first question, Mike, is, what does this mean? They say now that the final rule is here, it's going into effect. It's like a Christmas present, I guess, December 15th. It's a pre-Christmas present. What does this all mean? Because we've heard a lot of, I would say, iterations of start and stop kind of thing, but basically, where are we at right now in this whole process?
Absolutely. So there are two rules that are going to go into effect to make CMMC totally effective and in use across all the Department of Defense contracting companies. The first one, Article 32, basically implements CMMC as a rule. So CMMC, as of December 16th, the 15th it becomes official, so the 16th is the first day it's actually operational, can be used and will be used. And in fact, turning on the DFARS clause So DFARS clause 7021, which is the CMMC, will now be able to be included in all solicitations and other things. Title 48 is effectively how do we include it and what are the processes that are required to be audited. And that's expected in Q1 in 2025. And so you will begin to see CMMC starting December 16th in all solicitations, but it won't be until um, Q1 that actual certifications can take place, like coming out and doing your official certification.
Okay. So they should expect in any new solicitations to see a CMMC requirement and a level requirement in those.
Correct. Correct. It is going to be phased in. We got the slides that will show that. Um, this is where we're talking about the Title 48, basically explaining how you meet each of these levels, but assessments will be start probably Q2 next year, like formal assessments. But the fact you need to meet CMMC will begin in solicitations in Q1.
Okay. And then I know on to the next slide, how are you phasing? Can you explain a little bit about what this phase-in process means?
Absolutely. So when they say begins at 48, this is when it actually goes into effect, the how. So we're expecting that Q1, but the minute it hits Q1, the solicitations will have you in the first phase do self assessments. So a self assessment is you verifying, much like you're doing today. The difference is instead of having a self assessment with a poem and a score, there's not going to be a score. You're either going to meet or not meet the level of CMMC that you're required, level one or level two. And that letter of attestation has to come from your senior executive. So someone in a C suite has to sign a letter saying, I promise I meet this. And that's where some of the scariness comes in because they have already started false claims acts against people who have said they've met controls that they haven't. So they're taking it very seriously, even in the self assessment phase.
I would think so.
Phase
I
two.
mean,
Yeah, go ahead, Tom.
essentially, that's kind of why CMMC came into place in the first place, right? Because there was a
Absolutely.
requirement to meet NIST, and then people were saying they were, or they were just submitting stuff, but really not being very well secured.
Yeah, and I think people weren't fully aware of what they were signing. You know, they're like, yeah, I'm meeting security controls. We have cybersecurity here. Well, let's say we've met it. Um, with the implementation of the 110 controls and a NIST guideline, it got more specific. And, people again signed off or had poems open forever. And so they want to kind of close that gap.
And actually, to that point, can you perhaps explain to the audience around what will be an absolute requirement? Meaning, my understanding is, particularly if you're at a level two, there are what I guess you'd call the higher rated scores
Yep.
that just cannot go on a plan of action. They have to be implemented.
Correct. So because we're phasing in, they assume that as with any inspection, you may think you're meeting things and maybe you're lacking in some areas. They're still going to allow a POAM, a program of action and milestones. However, the 110 controls are each rated with a score of 1 to 5. And the rule has come out that if it is a level 5 rated control, a POAM will not be authorized for a passing score. If you have ones and twos, mostly they're ones. So if you have level one rated controls that you haven't met or you need to make some adjustments, you're allowed a POAM. However, you have to fix it and update it within 6 months. And I guess the thought is, Tom, that if you have a 5, you probably can't fix it in 6 months.
Right.
So there's no sense saying do a POAM and fix it in 6 months and we'll pass you. They assume that's a harder control to meet.
Right. So you need those are, as far as if I were looking, would you suggest looking at what those different rated controls are so you know absolutely what you have to have in place?
I would definitely understand the difference between each control and the rating value, because if you do fall short, you don't want to fall short on a rated 5 control and realize you can't, fix it up in a little bit and come back and still pass the certification.
Gotcha.
And I think this is where then when we move into phase two, they're going to start requiring certifications. So we're looking at early 26. You're going to have an organization like ours come out and do an assessment. Um, the numbers kind of indicate that there's not a lot of our assessing companies out there, not a lot of assessors, and a lot of companies who are going to need it. So I would assume even in 25, the minute the door opens for assessments, people are going to start asking us to do it. So you don't want to wait, to be ready, number one, and two, to go out and become assessed.
Gotcha. And actually, just back to that point, so you're saying most likely the audits will start probably in 2026. For sure, they'll start in 2026. So in between that, most of these companies, if you're a supplier, are going to have to do a self-attestment in 2025.
Correct. So they'll be required to do the self-attestment in 2025. Um, but again, in 2026, they're saying phase two, which is the requirement of actual 3CPAO assessments and certification. But you don't want to, it's going to, for both of these, the self-assessment and the certification, you have to have them at the time you submit your proposal. It isn't something that you can get 6 months after award. You won't be awarded unless you meet the criteria, either a self-assessment or a certification. So you don't want to wait till 26 to then call around and see if you can get someone to come certify you because you want to submit a bid.
Right. And I guess to that point also with the false claims and a senior signing off, you better make sure that self-attestment is clean, right?
Right. Yeah, the last thing you're going to want to have happen is, because breaches happen, you can't stop them, but you don't want a breach to happen and then have the government go, well, you said you met these. Let's look and verify that you did.
Great. So one of the next questions in your process, and I think you're right there, what tend to be the most common gaps or challenges that you're seeing with companies that have been going through this experience now? And hopefully everyone that's on this call, if they're a supplier, has gone through this. If not, I think we're pointing out you better get things in place because it's here. But
Right.
maybe you can speak to some of the gaps and challenges that you guys have typically seen.
Yeah, so this is what we've picked up on as the most common challenges and gaps. I'll go through, I've kind of put one or two for each of the 14 domain areas. But under access control, it's really understanding who has access to what and what privileges. I think a lot of us have a faint idea, but across your entire enterprise, you might be surprised who has what privileges where, and it has to be spelled out in detail in your documentation. So understanding who's an authorized user and what privileges they have, awareness and training, making sure you can document it. Documentation has been the big lacking area. People do training or that's part of their user books, user handbooks, but it's not documented. They've taken it. Under audit and accountability, the biggest gap here is not having some sort of SIEM or other centralized logging collection so that you can automate a lot of these tools. Because if you don't centralize it, you have to do it manually across all your systems. A small company, that might be easier, but if you have any size domain and enterprise, that would be more difficult. Configuration management. Most small businesses didn't have a formal CCB, configuration control board, and you have to document any change to your system. This is one of the biggest findings we found was people weren't documenting version changes. So they would update just their Office suite and not do a change board because the version changed. So if the version changes, your baseline changes.
Actually, Mike,
Identify.
that question, a lot of these companies are outsourcing a lot of their business to an MSP. are you typically finding that those MSPs are not aware of this, or maybe it sounds like configuration management relates a little bit to more of the technology back component, right?
Yeah, great question. It's effectively your MSP probably has a ticketing system, and that's how they're logging and tracking. So that will help because you will have that documentation. Then you just need the approval process. Who approved that change? Were they authorized to approve that change? Did you have a board or did you just singular approval? Tom gets to say, yes, go ahead. Or do you have a more, and however you do it, document it. That's the important thing. So if you are the approval Tom, then you have to put in your documentation that Tom is the sole approval for all IT things. And as soon as you click yes on the ticket, they're good to go.
Gotcha.
So it's important there. Again, and we're going to talk about this later, but documentation is key to match your implementation. Um, Under identification and authentication, we found that a lot of administrators did not have just standard user accounts, and you have to separate the duty. So your day-to-day operations you need to do as a user, and then you only log in as an administrator to do those higher level functions. IR, incident response. Um, a lot of people had a plan, but they weren't practicing it. They didn't show that they did it on a semi-annual or annual basis with documentation that it happened, not just, no, we do one twice a year. You have to show you did it and what were the results. Maintenance is an old school idea of cracking open computers, and vacuuming them out. But even if you have a laptop and you dust it once a week, you got to have some sort of plan. How am I taking care of my machine to include logical maintenance? When are you patching? When are you updating?
Mhm.
Media protection. Those USBs will kill you every time. How you stopping USBs? Are you allowing USBs? Are they labeled correctly? Do you have CUI USBs, non-CUI USBs? So again, it's documentation and follow through. Your physical protections, locked door, cameras, being able to document that. Um, the biggest one is how do you track physical access? One of the controls that's often missed is we think of I have a visitor. So awesome, I sign you in. I'm tracking those, but they also require us to track your users. So are they badging in and you have a badge system? Easy.
Hmm.
You can just look at your badge system. But a lot of small businesses are like, it's me and Tom. I see Tom, Tom sees me. But you have to document that, that our logging in is how we track that we're authorized and in the system. We logged into our machine today. Um, Unless you want to have a sign in log every day that I'm here for work and everyone signs in that they're there for work.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Personnel security, background checks we found were lacking on a lot of companies. They hired people they know, or it's a small business and it's family, but you have to show some sort of what are you doing. Um, the level of background check is up to your company, but you have to show that I know Tom is Tom and he's on my network and he proved he was who he said he was.
Hmm.
Your risk assessments, documenting them. Most people we found don't do a formal sit down and say, what are our risks? Let's rate them. Let's rack and stack them from our most prioritized risk to our least prioritized risk. They may discuss it, they may have those ideas, but again, it's about that documentation and saying, we have done this formally. Here's our worksheet that we went through and our results. Security assessments, vulnerability scans. A lot of companies are not doing a frequent internal vulnerability scan. And that's something that's required because that is how you're going to find gaps in your patching. And so that needs to be, again, demonstrated in paperwork and then show that you've done it. That was a big one we're seeing is people like, I do vulnerability scans. And you're like, well, show me your last 12.
Mhm.
And they're like, I got my results from my last one. So you
And
want to be able to
sometimes,
show,
again, that can be something that your MSP is doing for you, that it's important that they're involved in the process, I think, from what I'm hearing.
absolutely. If you're outsourcing your IT to an MSP, um, they're going to have to be a key player because they are actually a controlled part of your infrastructure. You may think, well, they handle it, but really it's yours. You own it. But That outsourcing means you need to follow up and have that communication. And then uh, the system and communications protections, firewalls, ACLs in your routers. It's just documenting your data flow. One of the things that people miss is they'll have a network diagram, but they won't have a data flow diagram showing how your data comes in and out of your network, where it's stored, where it's transmitted at, and then how do you protect it. So that's your firewalls and ACLs. Then lastly, your system and information integrity. Um, this is making sure that you are constantly going through these 110 controls and making sure that you're meeting the timelines that you set. If you say, I'll respond to immediate vulnerabilities in 7 days, are you doing that? So it's not just to set it and forget it. You have to constantly show that you're maintaining your security.
Right. Which I think some also need to remember that this will, even though it may not seem like it, it is a continuous process because new things can get entered into your environment. So you need to have some kind of regular cadence of reviewing where you're at any point in time.
Absolutely. And one of the things that we found, these are our biggest lessons learned, but one of the things we found was simple as the baseline. You set your baseline for all your endpoints, but are all of them at the baseline? And does the baseline change? How frequently do you look at that baseline and update it? If you've put in that you're, using build version whatever for your Windows 11, they change possibly once a month, every second Tuesday when you get a Microsoft patch. That means that changes your baseline. So you have to go through and run through all that documentation to show you've approved it, number one, and two, you documented it.
Interesting. So actually to another question that leads into, I think what you're going to tell us through your audit is what kind of documentation and evidence will need to present during the audit?
Yeah, so what we found was I like to think if we can keep the auditor's job as simple as possible by providing them the most detailed information, the better. And so while we knew there were 110 controls and each control had objectives, we found they went through objective by objective. So there are 321 objectives that marry to the 110 controls, and evidence has to be available for each of those objectives. So 321 pieces of evidence, be it a procedure, a policy, or some sort of screenshot showing I've turned on two-factor authentication. So going through to have enough evidence is make sure you have a piece of evidence to marry up to each one of those 321 objectives under the controls.
And actually, this does point specifically to the level two. There still could be some level ones, but those level ones will have objectives underneath them as well, right?
Correct. They'll have 14 controls, but those controls will have objectives. So you have to be able to, when you self-attest to your level one, say, I can prove each one of these objectives under our 14 controls.
Right.
Much easier, but still, you need the evidence to back it up should you ever get audited. Um, we found that the system security plan is a critical element. Um, they told us more than once that um, if your system security plan is under 10 pages, you probably don't have enough information for a level two. And so we found that we broke it out by objective. So we showed in our SSP the control was met, and then all of the objectives, we separated them out, detailed they were met, and then we put in an implementation. And that's the biggest thing we learned again was that the policy needs to match the procedure, which needs to match specifically the SSP, which then needs to match the evidence you provided. So some of the key things in an SSP, you have to have an executive summary, your system information, all the authorized software, your system inventory, all the key roles and responsibilities. So if you call out, we have a data admin in one of your policies, our data admin will handle that. Well, then in your SSP, you got to explain what a data admin is and what that role and function is. And then again, going through each of the objectives and showing how you implement it. All your documentation needs to be signed to include your diagrams. So everything has to be approved. And to be approved, it needs a signature. So make sure you have signatures on everything.
And those signatures should be someone with the highest level of authority for that particular area, right?
Correct. Your SSP will be signed probably by a C level, and then that will come with an attestation letter as well. But all of the other documentation should be the senior level person responsible for, say, your data diagram or your network diagram. So your policies, procedures, and SSP need to be aligned. Um, we found during our audit, we had said that our screensavers would come on in 15 minutes. And so while we met, they can't, touch. Please make them marry up. So if you say 15, make sure it's 15. If you want it to be 10, say 10. Don't be different in what you're doing from what you say. And then configuration, this full and
We have a couple of other presenters with us. I'm hearing a little lag. Is that coming from Mike, everyone, or is it just me hearing that?
Yeah,
it could be.
Mike, you're breaking up when you look away from the computer. Just
Oh, geez. I'm looking at my
yeah,
other screen and it's causing chaos.
yeah,
That makes sense. I'll try to maintain the eye contact so it doesn't. Is it getting better? I mean, I'm
Yeah,
with
this is fine.
Comcast, so
It was just the last about 45 seconds that was starting to
uh,
have some of that lag.
yeah, welcome to the world of the internet where we never know when lag will hit us. Um, so yeah, I was saying you make sure your policies, procedures, and SSP are perfectly aligned. I had an issue with a screensaver timeout difference, 15 minutes versus 10 in reality. Um, in your
So
configuration,
you're actually even more secure,
yeah,
but
they said even though we were more secure, Tom, and we met our 15 minutes, and it was kind of one of those touch nose things. We prefer if what you say is what you do. That way there's no confusion. So,
I'm going to actually take a little bit different question. This is from someone who just submitted this. And it's a good question and maybe even points more to really digging in yourself to make sure you have this in place. But the question is basically with the huge number of contractors, are there going to be enough C3PAOs to certify these companies? And maybe that's
that,
also why we have this phase-in approach, but maybe your comment on that.
yeah, I feel the same way. I signed up at the beginning to be a C3 CPO. I assumed there was going to be more of us by the time it got implemented. I think there's still fewer than 100 um, for the thousands, 100,000 companies that are going to require this. I know that's why they're phasing us in. But I will say, having gone through this DIPCAC audit, they were tough on the three CPOs. They wanted to know we knew every one of those 110 controls and 321 objectives, um, proving each one. So that's why I'm kind of guessing. And when I talked about the phased approach, if you're ready, you're going to want to get on someone's certification list early because it will get to a crunch point, and I don't know if they're going to get enough in this phase in year of 25, expecting everyone to start getting certified in 26 to hit the mad rush at 26. If we start now, we might be able to get enough through and then more 3CPOs added. But that's a great question. Um, and one we bring up to the cyber AB all the time.
Let me
I do
put
see it.
one, I'm gonna got one more here.
Yeah.
Do I need CMMC certification if not selling direct to the government, but rather through a contractor? Will
Yes.
CMMC be flowed down to subs? Yes, if you're you follow on. If you are a sub and you're under that contract, you're gonna need to meet those requirements. Is that the
Yes.
correct statement, Mike?
That is absolutely correct. As part of Title 32, flow down will be required to subcontractors. So if you're providing a widget that goes into a main contractor's, full build, they will determine, and it will be your prime that determines the flow down, and it will be based on your CUI. What I'm seeing is a lot of the primes are flowing down level two in a just to be safe kind of mindset versus really looking at whether you're going to be dealing with CUI or not. So back to my widget example, it might be a widget that you can, commercial off the shelf kind of get, and you're just manufacturing it, but they'll probably flow down a higher level than you might need because I think they're just going to flow down whatever they get. That's typically a prime move to just flow down whatever they get instead of parsing
Yeah,
it out.
yeah, exactly. So a lot of, I'm hearing a lot of, obviously around all this, it's not just meeting the control, but having the proof that you meet that control. And
Exactly. So what I found was it was beyond just saying I met it and saying I had a policy that I did it. You needed to have an implementation. That's your procedure. How do I meet it? Um, the policy turned out to be pretty simple. Policy is I shall. So there's 110 controls, and you can say I shall do them with all of the objectives. I shall do this control with these objectives. You've met the policy. Not a lot of verbiage needed there. Where you need verbiage is in that procedure. How are you implementing it? So you have to detail specifically, I'm turning on my screensaver using an enterprise level GPO pushed out through Intune, however you're pushing it out. So it has to be pretty specific on how you're implementing it. And then that evidence is a screenshot. Here's the GPO. Here's where it says it's set for 15 minutes. And then look at your machines, grab a couple of your machines, screenshot that they're set by GPO for 15 minutes. Make sure everything matches.
I'll make a little plug for Sure Shield. We actually have some components of our process that can help automate the collection of that evidence. So in your example of like you need to do vulnerability scans. Well, if we actually happen to have a system that does scanning, and if you're doing that, we can actually pull that data into the evidence section of that to show when you did it, what you did, remediations you took, those kind of things.
Absolutely. And you also have all of the uh, objectives
Yeah.
listed under the controls. So you can type in exactly how you're implementing it to keep track. One of the other things that we saw with documentation and evidence is you need more than just the 14 policies and procedure documents showing the controls for each domain. You're going to need an incident response plan, a maintenance plan. One that we learned we needed and were able to make on the fly was a media posting plan. If you have a website, they're going to tell you that then you have a public facing
Hmm.
part of your domain. And whether you can say, I don't ever plan to put CUI on there because it's just my website, it says call me. Um, it's accessible by the public, and you could put CUI out there, right? Someone could mistakenly put CUI out there. So you have to have a plan on how do you make sure when your website's updated, you don't accidentally put the diagram to the widget you made.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
we found that one out because we were like, it's just text and pictures. What do you mean we need to have a posting plan? So that was one we caught. Your risk assessment report, configuration management plan, how are you going to do your CM, your authorized user list. So a lot of folks were just saying, well, it's in my Active Directory. These are my authorized users. Your Active Directory isn't signed. It's also not included in your SSP. So you're going to need down, a download CSV file or whatever that shows those users, and someone needs to authorize them with a signature, and all of that data then needs to go into your SSP. Your baseline documentation, you have to show what every computer's baseline is, across your enterprise. And then, of course, your boundary and network diagrams. So it's a pretty intensive list of documentation you need. Um, One thing that we found too, on the second bullet here, there is a naming structure that they would like to see,
Hmm.
and that caused a little stress as we went through all our files that we had named the way we had named them so that we knew what they were and had to rename them so that the auditors knew what they were.
Hmm.
And so this was an example of ours. It was the objective, the year, what you're going to get, like CMMC level two. You'll be assigned a number, then it's your company name, and then it's the file name that you actually named your file, and then finally the date. The key on this one is the beginning of that. It lists the control by objective that you're meeting. So you're going to find that you might have a screenshot of something that's going to answer four controls. That needs to be named four times, four copies of it. So that way you list by the control and the objective that it's meeting. So little duplication of effort there, but it makes the auditing much easier. And we said create an evidence book, you know, spell it out for them, put it into a directory tree that they can see by the domains. So you see what you're meeting.
And I actually was going to ask, and maybe Chandi can answer this question as well. Given some of the input, obviously we've partnered together for a while. Having gone through this process, we're even making some modifications, I think, to our own systems to be able to do that. So for instance, we provide the ability to collect evidence under every single control. Having a way to pull that into kind of a single book would be useful, Mike.
Yes, having, and again, for me, it's that making it simple for the auditor. So if you can walk the auditor through, so you've got domain one, control one, this is my policy, flip the page, this is how I'm implementing everything, and then here's the evidence, screenshots, and whatever. That way they can just flow through it instead of having to look here, look there, let me point you to where I've kept it. Putting it all in one directory structure just makes it I look at it as a binder, be it virtual or physical, but in a directory structure that they can find.
So
Yeah.
this,
So what we are doing there, Mike, based on the inputs that you have given us, we are actually working on, when you say generate documentation, we basically rename the documents accordingly. I mean, you may have input whatever it is, but based on the context for which it was input, we can name it based on the document convention that you outlined there, and also put them all into one evidence book, right, with the thing. So we can automate a lot of these, so make that process a lot more easier, while a user or somebody assessment organization focuses on meeting the objectives and providing the evidence there, putting them
All
all
right.
together in a way presentable for audit. That can be automated in the tool.
Excellent. Yeah, and the easier we make it for the clients, who make it easier for the auditors, the much easier your audits will go.
so
Um,
on to another question, and your slide is pulling it up, kind of what is the recommended kind of best ways to go through a self-assessment? But before that, there's one other question here. Can you see the open questions, Mike?
yes, I opened them up.
Okay,
So
maybe you can address the question about this AS 9100 registrars.
yeah, I think the only issue there, I think it would be a smart idea on their behalf to maybe join the CMMC uh, uh, infrastructure, but they would have to be accredited through the Cyber AB to be CMMC 3 CPAOs. Um, and that would need a DIPCAC audit of their company, but there's nothing that restricts them from that. So your AS 9100 folks could go through the CMMC process, become C3PAOs, and then they could be able to just give you a quality cybersecurity audit once, you know. Um, but I don't know how they would combine them. To me, it would still be two audit control sets, but they could hit you with one go, maybe save some money in doing them all together. But they would have to go through the Cyber AB in order to become the three CPOs. So, great question. I think that's if I was an AS9100 company, I might be thinking like, what else can I audit, right? How do I expand my business line? So that's a good question. As far as best practices, um, they are serious about the False Claim Act and making sure people are actually meeting the controls. So my number one best practice is make sure if you're saying you meet a control, you are meeting that control. So either have a third party, and it doesn't need to be a C3PO. You can get an RPO or hire yourself a CMMC practitioner, but have someone who kind of understands the answers to the controls and what's acceptable, give you the thumbs up that they're done. Um, Use that internal team that's not directly connected to the controls to ask the what ifs. You know, sometimes we don't see the writing on our own report that is incorrect. So having an external eyes to come through and go, well, how does that meet it? And ask you the hard questions themselves, then that'll help you out. Um, Follow the CAP, the CMMC assessment process to pretend you're a C3PAO. You wanna walk through it, train like you fight, fight like you train. So don't just assume you know the answer. And then make sure senior leadership's involved. They're going to have to sign off on this. And it's a lot easier if they understand and have full buy-in to how you answered the questions versus I'm just going to trust you, Tom. I'll sign this. When they realize there's false claims acts going around, they may say, I'm not signing anything. I don't know what it means. So bring them in from the get-go.
Mhm.
And then again, making sure everything matches. That was the biggest thing we found. If your policy says 15, make your implementation say it's 15, and then make sure your technology is set to 15, make sure everything marries up. And then this is the cap. So there's the 6 stages, basically plan and prepare, do your pre-assessment, verify your readiness, conduct the assessment, report your recommendations. So this is what we would do as a C3PAO, and then close out your POAMs if there is any of those one-pointer POAMs. So I recommend that you just take this process and kind of do it yourself,
Right. And
sit
help
through it.
most likely either do it, you make sure you have someone that understands it to do it yourself, or as you're saying, take advantage of the marketplace. As we mentioned here, a C3PA, being a C3PAO, they can still help you with that process. They just, if they do help you get ready, so if Digital Beachhead were to help you get ready, they just can't be your assessor. But to some degree, then you're going to know someone that actually would have gone through it, knows how to make sure that you're prepared. To my thought, that's not saying the RPOs don't do that as well. I mean, they have to get a validation process themselves to help with the process, but if you don't have that expertise, it would be recommended that you work with someone that's gone through and understands this whole thing.
Yeah, and we've had to answer all the controls. So any 3CPO will tell you, it was a painful process. So we're hoping to give that some of that pain and lessen it for you by knowing the answer up front.
Exactly.
So the continuous monitoring and improvement steps, um, use tools where you can, like a SIEM, XDR, EDR, XDR, vulnerability testings, make sure they're scheduled and you're meeting that schedule. That's a big one. And then any kind of scripts. One of the big scripts that we found was needed was in your Azure Active Directory, your Entra ID, checking for accounts that have been stale for 30 days and disabling them. There isn't a button you can click that does that for you. You have to run a PowerShell script. So try to find those tools where possible. Um, you have to be able to show you're demonstrating that you're doing it live. So beyond the screenshot, some portion of all these controls, they're going to say, that's great. I saw your screenshot. Now log in for me. Now, screen share with me and show me this is actually active. Um, Make sure your process improvements are part of your change management plan, and then track and monitor objectives at the frequency that they need to be done, and then document them. So if you can track it. And if it can be documented that you're monitoring it, document that you monitor it.
Right.
So
So it's something where you should be coming back on at least a periodic basis and making sure that even things that you've have stated are compliant are still compliant, right?
absolutely. And that's where they look in that continuous monitoring. So if you can do it automatically, with tools, that would be most beneficial. So our playbook is keep it simple. Um, know your scope. That's the biggest thing is understanding your boundary and your scope, understanding where you store your data, how your data flows, and then try to keep it affordable. You don't have to buy expensive solutions. You just have to make sure that your solutions are doing what they say they're going to do.
So let me ask a quick question. This is more because we do obviously have a new administration coming in, and people are wondering, there's theoretically a congressional approval that still needs to happen. But has there been any indication that from what I've heard, not this is going through.
Yeah.
It's been bipartisan from the beginning that but has there been any noise around this possibly not happening?
One congressman submitted a proposal to kill it. He had zero co-sponsors, and his proposal to kill it was a paragraph.
Yeah.
So it wasn't a lot of thought or energy put into the why it needs to be killed. And, like it wasn't a full-fledged document. It was just more of a shot across the bow with no co-sponsors. So,
And the NIST, the previous program was in place during the what will now be the new administration that's coming back in, right? It was in place back when they were there the first time.
yep. And they had no opposition then, so we don't expect opposition now.
Great. Great.
Yep.
Well, again, we still got a few more minutes for more questions here. We'll leave that open. Uh, any closing thoughts, Mike? And for those of you who might be interested in just getting some no-cost consultation from Digital Beachhead, um, please, I just opened a poll. Click on that, and folks from the team will follow up with you to schedule that consultation. Um, But any closing thoughts? I mean, of course, anyone that's in this process, if you have contracts, if you want to get in on, if you're considering getting in on this, you cannot escape this.
Right. It's coming. That's my final thought is it's it's been thought up 2017, 18, the first CMMC idea was floated and they mandated the NIST 800 controls and everyone just kept panicked at first. We got to be CMMC ready. We got to be CMMC ready. And then CMMC seemed to slide right. Um, but that's the government. Things slide right. But also, I think it was a clever mindset of the government is they got us all hyped. They told us that we needed to be, 800, prepared, and that hasn't gone away. So now we've had 5 years of requiring CMMC or requiring this 800, CMMC is just the formalization of those controls. So companies are going to be hard pressed to say, well, you dropped this on me and I'm not prepared. And how did you expect me to be CMMC ready in such a short time? The government's going to come back and say, well, you should have been NIST 800, which are the controls of CMMC. You've been self-attesting that you got a score of 80 with so many poems. You should have been closing those poems over this last 5 years.
Great.
So I think that's the mindset of the government with this train barreling down on us. So they're like, you saw the light a long way away. There's no reason you're not ready now.
Absolutely. It really is here. And as the one person pointed out, there will be a lot of you that will have to go through this process. And you want to be able to one, make sure you're ready, and two, get in there as soon as you can because you don't want it to be something that would impact you being able to get a contract or renew a contract too, because that will happen as well, right? On renewals, this will go back into place as well, right?
They're saying that the Article 32 has stated that if you have an option year, it will be written into the option year now that you need to meet CMMC at some level, one or two.
Gotcha. Good.
So current contracts. So if you get a task order on a current contract you have after the next year, those task orders will have CMMC clauses written in. So it's just a new DFARS clause.
Well, I do see that there's the poll is still open. If any of you haven't responded yet, uh, and team from Digital Beachhead will be following up with you. We do see several, Mike and Helen, that are asking for some follow-up, which is great. You do see this last question that came
I
in?
do. I do. Great, great question. Always with the cost estimate. Um, the cost estimate for a C3PAO audit, um, the government put out a number, um, and they're looking at 30 to 40,000 for an audit. As a 3PO, we know with a small business, we're looking at starting at about 20, 25,000 for an audit. Because, and the reason for that is they're mandating how many auditors we have to hire and then going through that entire process. Um, so right now, I would say anywhere from 20 to 100,000, depending on your size. A big company being the larger number, of course.
And of course, when you're going through that, you want to be ready because there can be additional cost if you start a process and you have a lot of things that are not in place and they have to come back, right?
Right. That's just those numbers are your cost of being audited. The government has put out they expect it to cost approximately 110,000 to become level two, but that's including all technical controls. And I don't think that was they based that on a small business, but of course, when a government entity tells you small business, they're thinking 25 million and below. They're not thinking three-person work center. So, the cost will vary. For those that are dealing with CUI, you're going to have an environment. So if you're in a Microsoft Office environment that's not government, not GCC or GCC high, you're going to have the expense of moving to that higher level. So from $20 a user to about $100 a user. So
There are
those
ways
are the
that you,
costs that you have to met.
and there are ways, as you've pointed out, that you can economize, just meaning that sometimes it doesn't mean doing it for the entire business. It might just be sectioning out a portion of that business that does, that will help drive down the overall costs, right?
Exactly. If you have a 50-person, work center and 10 of you are dealing with CUI, you don't necessarily need all 100 people to move into GCC high. You can create a new tenant and create like a little government division of those 10 people. So it reduces the cost overall. So that's why I said, Tom, it is really about your scoping and boundaries and understanding your data flows and who touches it and where and why.
Right.
Um, Government grants, I'm unsure of. Um, I know that if you're looking to hire or have one of your employees become CMMC um, certified, there are some government grants and programs that can help people, especially retired military or people just getting out of the military. They're putting it into the Skills Force program, where they're going to pay for the certifications. Um, what they've been saying, though, is this is part of your wrap rate. This is now an expense you have to pick on as a company. And that's where I go back to they're going to tell you, we've been telling you since 2018, so you should have been slowly increasing your wrap rates as you've slowly increased your technology requirements based on our demands of you.
Excellent.
But it sounds easy on paper. I will give you that. It sounds easier on paper what the government expects us to do and the reality of a small business and how we can compete. So I'm not immune to that. I'm just answering, I guess, how the government will answer you should you bring this up is but. They will say, well, I don't want to hear it. So we have to find a way around it then.
Great. Well, Mike, thanks for the insight. Happy
My pleasure.
holidays to everybody. sorry, this is coming. This is kind of a piece of, some might think of it as a piece of coal in their stocking, but you know, it's been out, like you said, there for a while, and we can help you, and Digital Beachhead can help you get ready for this in a very cost-effective manner with people that really understand what this is going to be like. So appreciate everybody joining today. For those of you that have asked for a follow-up, that information will be passed on to the folks at Digital Beachhead, and they'll be in contact with you. Obviously, we'll keep you all on regular communications should you need assistance in the future. And we thank you for your time. Just a little post for SureShield. We actually assist on the technology side with tools that actually help in the automation of some of this process. So we've been fortunate to have a great partner like Digital Beachhead working with us and using our systems as part of their process as well.
Highly
Again, thank
recommend it.
you. Mike, any last words?
No, just other than the train is coming. It's real this time. Let's be prepared for it.
Excellent. Thanks. And for those again who asked for follow-up, you'll be hearing from them shortly. Thank you everyone for your time and happy holidays to all.
Happy holidays. Nice meeting everybody.